When I say Dracula, what comes to mind?
I am Dracula.
And I bet Frankenstein sounds a lot like this.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Dracula, the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster, Phantom of the Opera, the Mummy, these ghouls seem like they've been creeping us out forever. But in reality, these monsters and our visions of them come from a very specific time and place. Universal Studios in the 1930s and 40s. Now, not many kids could name you any of the characters from most other classic movies of that era, but when you ask them about monsters...
Frankenstein
and like Dracula.
and mummies.
They know all of the black and white baddies made famous by Universal Studios. In fact, walking around a kid's Halloween party is kind of like taking a stroll through the vault of horror cinema classics, except they're a little fuzzy on some of the details.
You look like Dracula.
Yeah, I am.
Why is there blood on your face?
I don't know.
What's your costume? What did you dress up as?
A mummy.
So are you thousands of years old?
No, I'm only 5.
The children of the night, what music they make.
Okay, so take those kids and fast forward 40 years, and you've got a guy like this, Terry Beatty. He's quoting Bela Lugosi, the man who immortalized Count Dracula. Terry's in a basement with a group of other guys, and they're about to seriously geek out here because one of them is opening the door to his prized collection of monster memorabilia.
My wife has pretty much made it clear that she's trying to confine me and my obsession to this one room.
It's safe to say that his collection is pretty much awesome.
Oh my God, look at that. Wow. Is that an original?
Yeah, that is.
Hand-painted models, card games, vintage magazines, life-sized figurines, and even, get this, a Creature from the Black Lagoon pinball machine fill this tiny space. It's all owned by another Terry, Terry Ingram, and he started the Universal Monsters Army a few years back as a website for horror heads. His obsession runs really deep, though, to the point where it can get to be a problem with his wife.
She's not with it, man. She's not with it. She says, well, it takes up too much of your time. You know, if I try talking to you and it's not about Frankenstein or Wolfman, your eyes just gloss over and you fall asleep.
Okay, so it may seem hard to believe that these guys are this into something like monsters, but you gotta remember, when they were growing up, the late night creature feature was king. And the Universal Monsters, they were the best of the beasts. They were like the Rat Pack of horror. You know, they had movies, there was sequel to those movies, there was like comic books, cartoons, merchandise. But for Terry Ingram, he said these monsters, they were about more than just chills and thrills.
I think what keeps these films timeless is they're kind of like fairy tales. With Frankenstein, you know, there's this fear of rejection, and I think we all share that fear inside of us.
Friend, good, alone, bad.
Wolfman, just the savage beast ravaging.
I killed Richardson. If I stay here any longer, you can't tell who'll be next.
It's all of these kind of themes with misfits.
They are terrifying, but they're also sympathetic.
That's Aviva Bruthel. She teaches horror at Bowdoin College, and she says the Universal characters stood out because deep down they were kind of human and vulnerable. Like, take Frankenstein. He's just a lonely guy with poor social skills. He set out to make some friends, and he ends up getting chased by this angry mob who just don't get what he's about. I mean, who hasn't had a day like that? In a way, these monsters are like us, and that's what made them especially haunting, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really uncomfortable for an audience member to not be able to just push the monster away and think of that monster as utterly different, but instead to have to recognize that the monster reflects them in some way.
Today's horror movies, they harp on a kind of different theme, you know, like torture or gut-churning violence. But that doesn't mean that monsters have just disappeared from pop culture. Think Twilight or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Aviva says, exactly. She says that these days you're just as likely to fall in love with a monster as you are to fear them.
we've somehow learned to tame them by embracing them. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I think that, in a certain way, we are very willing to recognize ourselves in these monsters, perhaps because they present such innocent images of humanity.
Back in the basement, though, Terry Ingram says today's horror just doesn't cut it.
I'm not into it at all. I'm sorry, I'm old school all the way. It just lacks, I think, the magic that the old black and white films had.
And even if these classic movie monsters aren't starring in their own films anymore, you can be sure of one thing. They're not about to go away anytime soon. They're not going to die off because, well, for starters, most of them were never really alive to begin with. For Tortured Cinema, I'm your field reporter, Sanden Totten. Happy Halloween, everybody.